What's up, guys? This is Nick from Arch City Poker, and in today's video, I'm going to be continuing the How to Beat Live Low Stakes Poker series. Today's topic will be Keep It Simple Part 2, and if you haven't seen Keep It Simple Part 1, which is titled Just Keep It Simple, I suggest going back and watching that vlog. I think it'll give you a better understanding of the point that I'm trying to illustrate in this video. So what I'm going to do, and this is obviously not a vlog, I'm going to be using two live hands for my own personal hand history from some 2-5 games, and going to show you guys some spots where it might be a difficult or tough decision and maybe you're not sure what to do, but if you don't really know a whole lot about your opponent and you're suffering from what I talked about in Keep It Simple Part 1, which is information overload, and you're not sure how to apply advanced concepts like polarization or range versus range, thinking or interaction, then I think you can just basically think to yourself, what do most opponents in these types of games do in this spot? So to illustrate what I'm talking about, let's just get into the hands and not listen to me talk your guys' ear off the whole time here. So 7-handed, 2-5 game, unknown opponent in the cutoff limps, and I decide to ISO him with King, Queen of Clubs. I think that's pretty standard. Very strong hand to have on the button. Both the blinds fold, and my opponent decides to call. And we see a flop of Ace Jack 5. Very good flop for my range. My opponent is not going to have hands like pocket aces, pocket jacks, top 2 pair. So I think I definitely have a range advantage. I think I have a lot of hands that I raise that hit this very well. So when my opponent checks to me, I go ahead and decide to bet half pot with my combo, which is pretty much a semi-bluff, but a very strong draw nevertheless. And my opponent decides to call. And great turn card, obviously giving me the second nut flush. My opponent checks, I decide to bet pot, and he ends up calling. So we get to the river, and all of a sudden, my opponent pots $300 into me here. Now, what's interesting about this spot is that I've shown so much strength from pre-flop up to this point, and although I did say that I had a great range advantage on the flop, my opponent could have turned some flushes, could have turned possibly a set, I guess, although I expect eights to often fold on this flop. I think he could have flopped bottom set and been playing it kind of tricky, that type of deal. The point that I'm trying to illustrate in this video is that I didn't really know this opponent that well, and instead of thinking about things like range advantage or my pot odds, which are 2-1 in this spot, so I really need this specific hand to be good about 33% of the time, and I think a lot of players would look at this hand and say, well, Nick, you have the second nut flush. I think that's way better than, or I think it's better than 33% of the time, basically. However, if you really think about this spot, my range, as I said, can certainly have full houses in it, very large flushes at this point. I don't think most opponents in a live 2-5 game are all of a sudden just going to bluff in this spot. I certainly can have an abundance of strong hands on this board run out, and you just don't see opponents bluff enough, specifically like in this spot. It's a very weird line. I think that he should not have really many value combos at all, but to kind of back up my point, what kind of bluffs does he have in this spot? Does he really have a hand like King 10 or King Queen that was a gutter that he's just turning randomly into a bluff? Does he have the Ace of Clubs, which maybe for some reason he doesn't think is good enough at showdown and he's just going to bluff the nut flush? I don't think so. I think most opponents that would have like the Ace of Clubs and let's say like 10 of spades in this spot, I think they think that their hand is probably good enough to try to get the showdown or at least check call, and I don't think that really most opponents in this player pool are going to try to turn that type of hand into a bluff. So I think that this is very value heavy. Even if his range is quite narrow, I would expect him to show up with a lot of Ace-5 or maybe even quads in this spot. I just don't see him trying to take a smaller flush, which I should show my hand again here that I do have the second and third nut flush, so he could certainly have the Ace-High flush. but that's obviously still beating me. So I think that hands he would bet for value here are always going to be better. I don't think he is betting the 9 high flush in this spot ever. And I think that he just has no bluffs. And so I went ahead and folded. And he was nice enough to go ahead and show me that he did have ace 5 of spades and boated up on the river. So a spot where I think, in theory, I may be calling at least some of the time for sure. I think in these live low stakes games, this is a pretty easy spot to really understand what the average player is doing in the spot, or basically more, I guess a better way to put it is, what do players do on average in this spot? Like, what does his hand look like pretty much most of the time? And I think that it's going to be very value heavy and never really a bluff in this spot. So I think that was a pretty good example. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the second example here. And not to spoil it, let's get to the beginning of the hand. So, and don't pay attention to the Snowie evals right now, because this is going to be more for like optimal play and GTO type of stuff. So that's not what we're talking about. I'm just using Snowie as a viewer, basically, as I said. So again, 2-5. My opponent in the cutoff again limps. Different opponent this time, but still unknown. I wish I would have typed that in here, but you guys can obviously hear me tell you that he is an unknown player to me. I go ahead and decide to ISO him with King-Jack offsuit on the button. I think that's pretty standard. Blinds both fold again, and the cutoff goes ahead and decides to call. And we see a flop of Jack-10-3, two-tone with 2 hearts. My opponent checks. I decide to bet half pot for value, as I think I definitely, again, have a range advantage on this board. I think most unknown opponents in live 2-5 games from the cutoff could be raising hands like pocket jacks, pocket 10s, Jack 10 suited. I think definitely raises. I think Jack 10 offsuit finds a raise at least a good portion of the time. I think even pocket 3s find a raise here often, but certainly could be limped in. The point is, I think he's pretty capped here, and I think that I definitely have more good hands than he has in the spot, so I will go ahead and bet for value. And very interesting, my opponent decides to check raise me, and this is a spot where you know, I think based on my pre-flop range of him, what do most opponents have in the spot? Well, as I said, I think it's really hard for him to have pocket jacks, especially because I do have 1 jack in my hand. Same goes for Jack 10, like top 2 pair. And I think pocket 10s. I think he is trying to rep a hand that's hard for him to have at this point. This board is pretty draw heavy. I think he could certainly have many combinations of hearts, stuff like 9-8, maybe 8-7 for a gutter, possibly some king-queen or king-9. I think king-queen raises most of the time, but do you think he could have that sometimes? So I think this is a spot where I don't know my opponent. I'm not going to try to range him super specifically, although I gave you guys a pretty specific idea of what I think his range is. But I think the point is, I think most opponents are pretty empty in this spot. And so maybe, even though I don't know him, maybe this is a pretty loose opponent. And I think he is pretty empty with his range here. And he's made up, his range is made up of a lot of bluffs. So I go ahead and call. And I think that's pretty standard. I don't think there's any reason to raise against what kind of hands I think he has in that spot. 4 clubs, peels on the turn, and my opponent checks. And this is a very, I think, difficult spot for a lot of players in my shoes, basically, in my position. I think that they think to themselves, you know, I think this guy's trying to get really tricky. I don't want to bet and have to fold my hand. However, this is the part of the hand that I wanted to really illustrate for this video topic. What would most players in a live 2-5 game or even 1-2 game, you know, any live low stakes game basically, are they really good at check raise on the flop with this texture and then go for like some kind of cute tricky check raise on this turn? I don't think that they want you to draw for free, and I think that with their bluffs, they obviously want to continue showing strength, so I think they'll continue on this brick. And I think with their strong hands, they're just going to keep trying to build a pot and get their stack in by the river and charge your hand, which is, in their eyes, probably often drawing. So he ends up checking to me in this spot, and I decide to go with a bet for half pot. because I think my opponent, like I said, I just don't think that most opponents in these types of player pools are going to play a hand like this. And so I think this was often a semi-bluff that was maybe trying to get me to check to see a free card in the river. He could have had maybe air that he just decided to give up on his bluff, but I just think that this is a perfect spot to just bet against an unknown opponent just based on what I think players do on average in this spot. I just think he is betting this turn card with pretty much all his value hands, and I think he will be betting with most of his bluffs, but this check to me really, I don't see players getting tricky in this spot on average. So I think it's a spot where I bet, I charge his draws to see the river, and if he goes ahead and raises, I think most opponents in the player pool are just not getting tricky enough in that spot, and I'm okay with bet folding my hand here. I think it's probably the worst hand at that point, and I just don't think there is enough incentive to try and bluff catch against a line that is check raise, check raise. So that hand was a little more tricky and complicated, but I think you guys probably got the point, or at least I hope you did. I think that, to wrap up this video, just basically, like I said in the vlog, keep it simple, and then in this video, keep it simple part 2, just really having a good understanding of what players will do on average in these spots, and that will really help you with tricky decisions, and help you with the whole issue of information overload, having to worry about applying all these advanced concepts and ranging opponents. I think if you simplify it a little bit, then it'll definitely help you guys in spots like this. So if you have any comments or questions, let me know in the comment section as usual, and I'll try to respond as quickly as I can. But this is Nick from Arch City Poker. Till next time.